Welcome to the First Draft Club, a podcast to help you write your book with joy, clarity, and maybe a few coffee stains. I'm Mary Adkins. Dear Mary, should I revise as I go, or should I write the first draft and then go back and revise? And when I do finish, should I go back and revise chapter by chapter, or should I read the whole thing first and then revise? All right, I have pretty strong views on this question. I think writing a first draft is a kind of precious experience that is very easily interrupted by intentions that seem good when you first have them, like fixing a scene or tweaking a sentence or going into a research rabbit hole around a particular scene in your book. All of these can seem like good uses of time because technically they're writing in a way or writing adjacent, but what they really are creative cul-de-sacs. Your goal when you are writing a first draft is to get it done. And not just to get it done, but to get it done in a way that honors your vision for it. So the core idea at the heart of it that captures that thing, whatever that thing is, the reason you were inspired to write a book in the first place. What is the human condition that your story is speaking to? What is the question at the heart of it? That's where you want your mind to be when you're working at that level of concern. What is this story and what is the meaning of it? Where you don't want your mind to be is in the nitty-gritty kind of surrounding the details of how you're executing that vision. So a particular character's middle name or the name of the street they live on or exactly what color hair the boss has or what color the drapes are in the living room. Details, of course, are super important. They're how we transport the reader. But overly focusing on them in the first draft can pull you out of that mindset you want to stay in order to get the shape of the thing on paper. So when I think of revising as I go, I put it in two categories. There is fixing a scene because the big elements need to be in place in order to even keep writing, in order to move the story forward. So for that, your question would be, if I don't revise this scene, I don't really even know what I'm going to write next. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I won't know how the characters are evolving. That kind of revision can be super important. When we start talking about that, what we're talking about is going back and starting your whole book in a different way or really changing the focus of the story. And that, I think you know if that's what you're doing. And if that's what you're doing, then yeah, you need to do that. That's important. It's a good call. So if what you're doing is going in to revise a scene for that reason, I would get in, fix it, and get out because you don't want to lose momentum. I think of running a race. I used to run marathons. And if you are running that far, if you're running a long distance like that, if you need to stop and take a bathroom break, which of course happens because you're running for hours, you may need to go to the bathroom. You want to do it as quickly as possible. People are really hurrying. And if you're someone like me, you're not doing that because you care about your time. I mean, I didn't run marathons for my time. I ran it because it meant something to me to achieve a goal like that. But I would hurry during the bathroom break because I didn't want to lose my momentum, right? I don't want to have to warm up again. I don't want to have to risk a cramp because I took too long of a break. That will not be good. So in the same way, if you're revising a scene as you go, you want to get in and get out and keep your momentum. The other kind of revision would be going in to work on the level of the sentence. And by this, I mean the color of the drapes, the way you're describing the clouds, the name of the neighbor's dog. These are considerations that you do not need to be overly focusing on when you're writing a first draft. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So I've mentioned one of them, which is you want to stay in that mindset of executing the overall vision and focusing on getting the shape of what you're doing on paper. But two is that you're going to cut a lot of your first draft. You're going to cut a whole bunch of it. And that's just the nature of being a writer. And so since you're going to do that, it doesn't make sense to spend a bunch of time editing at the level of the sentence when an entire chapter could be cut, right? So I often find after I write a first draft that my first chapter gets cut because my first chapter is often a bunch of backstory and no one wants to start with the backstory. If I have spent a whole bunch of time editing the sentences in that first chapter so that they're beautiful, that's awesome that I have a bunch of beautiful sentences, but the whole chapter has just been cut because it doesn't fit with the structure of the overall book. So big revisions as you go, and small revisions you want to save until later when you're pretty sure that the major chunks of the book that are there are going to stay there. And the last part of the question was, when you do go back and revise, so when you finished your draft, do you revise chapter by chapter or do you read the whole thing first? 100% read the whole thing first. Trust me, I made this mistake so many times. With my first novel, I would rewrite it and then I would dive back in and start not only revising, but editing. And the difference is, the way I think of the difference is revising is doing structural work on the story arc and character development and that sort of thing. And editing is really focusing on the specifics of the sentence. So really working at the sentence level. And I would start editing before I'd even reread my new draft. So I'm editing as I'm going, and it ends up wasting tons of time because, again, you're editing sentences that you end up cutting. There's no point in editing something that's not going to be there in the end. So you absolutely want to read your whole draft first, but not just to save yourself time. There's a more important reason. I call it the gut read. You want to read like a reader is going to read your book. You don't want to read it like a writer is reading your book. And I know that's tough because we are writers. And so you're going to be reading it thinking of literary devices and how you executed them and whether your sentences are beautiful enough. But I want you to try to resist that impulse and read it as a reader would read it. And when readers read books, what do? We want to be engaged. We want to be entertained. We want to be moved. We want to be transported. And so when you read your draft, you want to note when you feel that way and when you don't feel that way. When are you interested? When do you want to turn the page? When does it lose your attention and you find yourself having to reread a paragraph or staring into space or wondering what you're going to do next? That's really important information. So as you're doing that initial read, you want to track those reactions so that you can use that information later when you enter writer mode and do something about it. Places where you were super engaged as the reader, great. Those parts are working for now. You don't need to touch them. Places where your mind started to drift, something's not working there, right? So why were you suddenly bored? Where was the slack in the story? You only have that information if you read as a reader. When we're reading as writers, we're often too focused on the mechanics to notice those things, and those are the most important things. The reader's reactions are the most important reactions. And some, wait until the end to revise, and before you do, read through your draft like a reader would. Thanks for listening to the First Draft Club. Subscribe and leave a review, and I will adore you forever. Happy writing! See you next week.